Okay, welcome back once again. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about secondary data as opposed to primary data. And remember, just talking loosely, primary data is basically the data that we collect ourselves. It can be all sorts of data, like qualitative or quantitative. And secondary data is really data which we don't collect ourselves, and it's research that somebody else has done, or it is data that we can access without expressly setting out to collect that data. So it could be from other sources. So it's quite a broad term that is secondary data. So much of the data for decision making can be found within an organization or outside of the organization. As I said, and it's not data, it's data which has not been specifically collected to answer the research problem. And obviously the most important reason for using secondary data is, first of all, it's readily available. So generally it's cheaper than going out and collecting your own data, and also it's often quickly available, because obviously you don't have to spend all the time and effort and the logistical problems associated with collecting your own data. So it's sometimes referred to as desk research, so you might see that term. So if they're referring to desk research, that really means often within the context of marketing research anyway, that it's a collection of secondary data. So what are the why not just use secondary data? So what are the advantages of it? Well, as I've said to you, some of the advantages are it's available, it's cheaper, you can sometimes get it almost instantaneously, if you download data from electronic sources. Obviously it's a lot less effort, as I've mentioned, and secondly, if you've got secondary data, it can enhance the collection of primary data. So that suggests that irrespective of whether you feel it's necessary to collect primary data, it's always a good idea to go and first have a go at collecting secondary data. As I said, it's cheaper, it's quick, so it can only enhance your data collection, your primary data collection. So there's no harm in giving it a go, provided that it doesn't cost too much and it doesn't take too much in terms of resources. So looking at the limitations, obviously there are certain limitations associated with secondary data, and the first thing is obviously it's not focused on your research problem, and as such it might not be able to answer the whole of the research problem, but certainly it might be able to help you refine your research problem. Secondly, it might not be applicable to the population. You can't start arguing, say for example, that students prefer a particular flavor of cool drink or perhaps hamburger if it is a different population. So for example, students in Nigeria or Ghana might be very different to the students in terms of South Africa. So one has to be very circumspect about applying lessons learnt from other populations to where you are doing your research. Also, data may be outdated, it might be inaccurate, and so one has to bear that in mind, because secondary data can become outdated very quickly. If you think about data that was collected 5 years ago, or even a year ago, I think this COVID is going to have massive implications on terms of our attitudes and our values. So data which was collected pre-COVID could be really not that relevant for our perceptions and values in 2 or 3 years time. Also, there's no collection, no control over the collection of the data. We don't know if for example, the field workers were briefed properly? Was the data collated, properly recorded? We've got no control over that. So one has to be cognizant of those limitations in respect of the data. One can obviously collect secondary data from two sources. Internally, what's happening in your business, what are the sales reports, financial analyses, etc. Just bearing in mind once again the constraint associated with secondary data, and that it's not collected to solve a specific problem. External data, yeah, I mean, that's almost anywhere you can get the data. So really there's no restriction in terms of defining what we mean by secondary data. It's really data that is not primary data. So any other place that you collect it, it's defined as secondary data. The one way one can limit the danger associated with controlling for validity with secondary data is try and get it from the original sources, because like the analogy of the broken telephone, the more people repeat it and analyze it, the more likely it is to diverge from its original finding. Yeah, just to kind of largely reiterate of what I've just said earlier, just bear in mind the following when evaluating secondary data. Firstly, it wasn't gathered for the immediate study, so the focus might be different. One has to be concerned about the accuracy. Also, a good idea is to try and get multiple sources of the same or similar data, just to see if it reinforces, if they reinforce each other. The credibility is always an issue. Even in academic journals, some of the journals differ in terms of the credibility. So one wouldn't accept what an article says in one particular journal as opposed to another journal. So one needs to have a look at the actual source of the information as well. And the methodology is critical. You need to kind of look at that and make sure that it is consistent with good research practice, and obviously be aware why the data was collected. There sometimes is bias. If researchers are working for a particular organization or a particular agenda, they might be biased in terms of their interpretation and collection of the data. Yeah, one obviously has to bear in mind the age of the data, as I've discussed earlier. I mean, certainly it's not going to be any good to us if it's over 20 years old. Another factor, and it's really something which is quite interesting, the cost can be an indication of quality, and if you think about that in respect of most services or actual physical products, cost is often an indication of quality, and it's really no different when it comes to buying marketing research or secondary research, should I say. Okay, well, that's the end of that chapter. That's chapter 6. We are now going to consider primary data, and that's going to be your next section.